Good evening, Canada. I'm Liam Smith, and this is Canada Tonight. And tonight, right now, something is happening that every Canadian needs to understand. Not tomorrow. Not in a policy briefing next week. Tonight. Because what is unfolding at this very moment, in the corridors of power from Ottawa to Brussels to Tokyo to Singapore, is nothing less than a restructuring of the global economic order. And Canada, is the one leading it. Let me be direct with you. Canada is actively leading negotiations to build the world's largest free trade bloc. Not a Canadian trade deal, not a regional pact. The largest free trade bloc on the planet. Full stop. Right now. This is happening. According to Politico, Prime Minister Mark Carney has stepped forward and taken the lead in talks involving Canada, the European Union, and Indo-Pacific partners. Talks aimed at building a sweeping new trade coalition that would redefine Canada's place in the world and reshape global commerce for generations. Approximately 40 economies are currently exploring participation. The names on that list will tell you everything about the scale of what is being assembled. Singapore, Mexico, Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Australia, and many more. This is not a wish list. These are active conversations happening right now. The foundation being used to build this mega alliance is the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, which Canada already belongs to. That agreement alone represents approximately 14% of global GDP. But what is being discussed goes dramatically further. The plan is to link CPTPP with European partners, with emerging market economies across Southeast Asia, and with other democratic trading nations, creating a combined economic bloc unlike anything the modern world has ever seen. Tonight, Canada. Tonight breaks down the full story. What this mega alliance is, why it is being built right now, who is in it, what Canada gains from leading it, and what it means for every single Canadian and for the world. This is the most consequential trade story in a generation, and it is breaking tonight. Let's get into it. To understand why Canada is charging forward with this initiative at this precise moment, you need to understand the crisis it is designed to confront. Because make no mistake, this is a response to a crisis. The rules-based international trading system, the framework of agreements, institutions, and norms that has governed global commerce since the end of the Second World War, is cracking. It is cracking right now, in real time, and the fractures are widening by the week. The World Trade Organization's dispute settlement mechanism has been deliberately weakened. Major economies are slapping tariffs on trading partners in violation of existing agreements, and facing zero consequences for doing so. Supply chains built on decades of assumptions about openness and predictability are being torn apart by geopolitical competition. Countries that built entire economies on the principle that free and fair trade would be protected by international rules are waking up to a terrifying reality. Those rules are only as strong as the willingness of powerful nations to follow them. And right now, tonight, that willingness is at its lowest point in decades. Canada is actively leading talks among middle powers to build a major trade alliance specifically to counter this economic pressure and to fortify global supply chains against future shocks. The policy logic is urgent and clear. If the rules-based order cannot be enforced from the top down by international institutions, then it must be defended from the bottom up, by a coalition of countries that are still committed to it. And if that coalition is large enough, representing enough economic weight, enough consumers, enough productive capacity, it becomes effectively impossible to ignore, even by the most powerful players on earth. The policies of Donald Trump, particularly the sweeping tariff measures his administration has deployed, have fractured global trade flows and sent allied countries scrambling for new frameworks to reduce their exposure and strengthen their economic resilience. Canada is not alone in feeling this pressure. Japan feels it. Vietnam feels it. Malaysia feels it. Singapore, Australia. Every one of them has felt the destabilizing weight of unpredictability from the world's largest economy. And every one of them is searching urgently for frameworks that offer more stability, more resilience, and more protection. Last November, European and Indo-Pacific partners made a formal pledge to cooperate in softening the impact of global tariff tensions and in strengthening trade and investment flows between their markets. That pledge, made while Canada held the G7 presidency, was the early foundation of what is now a far more formal and far more ambitious process. Canada is now leading that process, and Canada is leading it because Canada has something irreplaceable in this moment: credibility, existing relationships, and a strategic vision bold enough to match the scale of the problem. Let us look carefully at the foundation on which this mega alliance is being built, because understanding the CPTPP is absolutely essential to understanding the magnitude of what is now being proposed. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership is currently a free trade agreement involving 12 countries: Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, Mexico, Peru, Chile, Brunei, and the United Kingdom, which recently joined, adding one of the world's largest economies to the bloc. Together, these 12 nations already represent approximately 14% of global GDP. Significant, meaningful, but not yet dominant. What makes CPTPP critical is not just its current size, it is its architecture. CPTPP has comprehensive modern trade rules covering not just tariffs, but digital trade, intellectual property protections, state-owned enterprise discipline, labor standards, and environmental protections. It is widely recognized as the gold standard for 21st century free trade agreements. And it was designed from the very beginning to be expandable, a platform, not a ceiling. What Canada is now working urgently to build is an expansion of this framework on an extraordinary scale, connecting CPTPP with European Union trade partners, drawing in additional Indo-Pacific economies, and creating linkages with other regional blocs. The result, if Canada succeeds, would be something the world has never seen before: a free trade framework spanning both the Pacific and the Atlantic, connecting the world's most advanced democracies with the fastest-growing emerging markets, creating a zone of rules-based commerce so large that even non-members would be compelled to align with its standards in order to do business within it. Business groups across Europe are already sounding the alarm in support. They are arguing loudly that broader cooperation and unified trade rules are urgently needed to help their economies resist future global economic shocks. European business leaders understand what is at stake. A broader trade alliance with clear rules and strong enforcement mechanisms creates the predictability that long-term investment demands. Without it, businesses face constantly shifting ground, and constantly shifting ground means delayed investment, disrupted supply chains, and economic stagnation. Now let us confront directly the question that demands an answer. Why Canada? Why is a country of 40 million people the one driving a global coalition of this historic scale? The answer is not luck. It is not coincidence. It is the product of deliberate, sustained, and sophisticated diplomatic work. Canada currently has preferential trade access to 1.5 billion consumers across 15 free trade agreements spanning 51 countries and nearly 2/3 of global GDP. Canada is not building this mega alliance from a standing start. Canada is already connected, through existing agreements and relationships, to most of the potential members of this new framework. Canada is not starting from scratch. Canada is connecting an existing network of relationships into a single, far more powerful structure. Canada also brings something money cannot buy in a moment like this: credibility. Canada helped build CPTPP after the United States abruptly withdrew from its predecessor agreement. Canada negotiated CETA, one of the most comprehensive trade deals in history, with the European Union. Canada has maintained its trade commitments even under intense political and economic pressure. Canada has been willing to use trade dispute mechanisms to defend its rights rather than quietly absorbing violations. In a world where rules-based commerce is under siege, Canada's track record of actually following and defending those rules makes it a uniquely trusted partner. And then there are the relationships Carney himself has forged. In the past year alone, he has visited 26 countries and signed 12 major economic agreements. He has built personal, working relationships with leaders across Europe, Asia, the Gulf, and the Americas. When Canada picks up the phone, those leaders answer. When Canada proposes a new framework, those leaders sit down and study it seriously. Carney said it plainly at Davos. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Canada is not at the table. Canada is building the table. The government's formal strategy makes the ambition explicit. Canada will pursue the implementation of a trade diversification strategy aimed at doubling Canada's non-U.S. exports within the next decade, through new beneficial economic partnerships, through a restructured economic relationship with the United States, and through strengthened collaboration with reliable trading partners and allies around the world. The Mega Trade Alliance is not a standalone project. It is the culmination of a sustained, systematic campaign of relationship building and agreement signing, a campaign that has been positioning Canada, deliberately and methodically, to lead exactly this kind of initiative. Let us look now at the 40 economies exploring participation, because understanding what they bring to this alliance is the only way to grasp why its combined weight would be so consequential. Japan is the world's fourth largest economy. It is already a CPTPP member and one of Canada's deepest Indo-Pacific partners. Japan brings world-leading advanced manufacturing, cutting-edge technology, and enormous appetite for Canadian energy resources, agricultural products, and critical minerals. Japan has every reason to want a stable, rules-based trading framework, and every reason to want Canada leading it. The European Union brings the world's largest single market, 450 million consumers, the most sophisticated regulatory standards on Earth, and massive, urgent demand for Canadian energy, minerals, and agricultural goods. Canada already has CETA with the EU. That existing legal framework is the bridge that makes deeper integration both feasible and fast-trackable. Australia brings critical minerals, clean energy expertise, and deep alignment with Canada's values and strategic interests. Canada and Australia are already building joint frameworks through technology partnerships, including initiatives with India. The two countries are natural allies in this endeavor. Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore. These are among the most dynamic, fastest-growing economies in Southeast Asia. Together, they represent hundreds of millions of consumers with rapidly rising incomes and surging demand for the advanced goods and services that Canada and its democratic partners produce. Their participation would give the Mega Alliance an extraordinary growth engine for decades to come. Mexico is already a CPTPP member and Canada's CUSMA partner. Mexico's participation ensures that the deep North American supply chain integration that underpins so much of Canadian manufacturing remains part of the picture, even as Canada simultaneously diversifies its economic relationships eastward and westward across the globe. The combined GDP of a 40-economy bloc built on CPTPP foundations, extended to EU partners and additional Indo-Pacific economies, would represent an enormous and unprecedented share of global economic activity. More critically, it would represent a critical mass of nations, all committed to the same rules of commerce. And that critical mass is what finally gives those rules the enforcement weight they have been lacking. Now let us be precise about what Canada gains from leading this initiative, because Canada is not building the world's largest free trade bloc out of charity. Canada's national interest is the engine driving this entire strategy. The most immediate and urgent benefit is trade diversification. The government has committed to a concrete, measurable objective, doubling Canada's overseas exports over a decade. A mega trade alliance encompassing 40 economies creates market access for Canadian exporters at a scale that no number of individual bilateral agreements could ever replicate. Canadian oil and gas flowing to Asian markets. Canadian critical minerals going to European manufacturers and battery makers. Canadian agricultural products reaching hundreds of millions of Southeast Asian consumers with growing purchasing power. Canadian technology companies gaining access to the most dynamic markets in the world. All of it operating under a common set of rules that protect Canadian investors, Canadian workers, and Canadian intellectual property. The second benefit is leverage. A Canada that leads the world's largest free trade bloc is a Canada that carries enormous weight in every major negotiation where trade is on the table. When bilateral agreements are being negotiated or renegotiated, including with Canada's most important trading partner to the south. Canada's position is fundamentally stronger when it has alternatives that are not just theoretical possibilities, but are built, functioning, and growing. The Mega Alliance is the ultimate proof of concept for Canada's diversification strategy. The largest possible demonstration to every potential partner and every potential adversary that Canada has genuine options. The third benefit is protection. Systematic, structural protection against economic coercion. The recent announcement of 30 new partnerships under Canada's Critical Minerals Production Alliance with 12 allied nations demonstrates exactly the kind of systematic coordination that creates mutual dependencies between nations, dependencies that strengthen both economic and security relationships simultaneously. A 40-economy trade alliance with deeply integrated supply chain frameworks creates exactly these mutual dependencies at the grandest scale imaginable. Countries that trade together, invest together, and share critical supply chains have powerful, concrete, material incentives to maintain those relationships and to protect their partners. Economic interdependence, built deliberately and at scale, is one of the most reliable defenses against coercion that any nation can construct. The fourth benefit is leadership, and on this one the stakes are historic. Canada has always punched far above its weight in multilateral institutions, at the United Nations, in the G7, in the Commonwealth, in NATO. Canada's global influence has always been disproportionate to its population and its geographic footprint, because Canada shows up, contributes seriously, and helps build the institutions that everyone benefits from. Leading the world's largest free trade bloc would be the single most consequential expression of that tradition in the entire history of this nation. Canada. Tonight is committed to honest, unflinching reporting, and that means telling you clearly and directly that building this mega alliance will be extraordinarily difficult. The obstacles are real, they are significant, and Canadians deserve to understand them. 40 economies means 40 sets of national interests, 40 sets of domestic political pressures, 40 trade negotiating teams with different priorities, different red lines, and different constituencies to answer to. Bringing all of them into a single coherent, enforceable framework will take years of patient, grueling diplomacy. The European Union alone has notoriously complex internal decision-making processes that can make even straightforward agreements take a decade to ratify. ASEAN countries vary enormously in their openness to deep trade commitments. India, which Canada is currently pursuing a separate bilateral free trade agreement with, has historically been deeply cautious about large multilateral trade frameworks that constrain its policy flexibility. There are also serious questions that must be asked honestly about whether a mega alliance of this size and ambition can remain stable over the long term without the participation of the United States. The U.S. remains the world's largest single economy. A major global trade framework built in deliberate exclusion of Washington creates frictions, political, diplomatic, economic, that every member of the alliance will also need to manage carefully in their individual relationships with the American government. And there are real domestic challenges within Canada itself. Trade liberalization at this scale creates winners and losers. Some Canadian industries will face intensified competition as new markets open and new standards are harmonized. Managing those transitions with fairness, protecting workers in sectors that face the sharpest adjustment pressures while capturing the full benefits of expanded market access is a genuine and complicated policy challenge that will demand honest attention and real resources. These are not small obstacles. Canada tonight raises them because Canadians deserve the full picture, the ambition and the difficulty, the opportunity and the cost. But here is what must also be said clearly. The direction is right. The need is urgent. The relationships are being actively built. And Canada's decision to lead this initiative at this specific moment in history reflects precisely the kind of bold, strategic, far-sighted thinking that this dangerous and fast-moving moment demands. Before I let you go tonight, I want to ask you to hold a vision in your mind, not a fantasy, a strategic vision that is being actively constructed right now by Canadian diplomats, by Canadian trade negotiators, by a Canadian Prime Minister who has traveled to 26 countries in a single year. Imagine a Canada at the center of the world's largest free trade network. A Canada with deep, active, and mutually reinforcing economic relationships with 40 countries spanning every continent. A Canada that exports its oil, its gas, its critical minerals, its food, its technology, its expertise, and its creativity to the most dynamic and rapidly growing markets on Earth. A Canada that no single partner, no matter how large, no matter how powerful, no matter how willing to use economic pressure as a weapon, can coerce or isolate because Canada has too many alternatives and too many allies. That is what is being built. Not overnight, not without enormous difficulty and years of painstaking work, but deliberately, systematically, urgently, and with leadership that understands, with cold clarity, that the window of opportunity created by the fracturing of the old global order will not stay open forever. The countries that act now, that step into the vacuum and build new structures, will define the rules of global commerce for the next half-century. The countries that wait, that hesitate, that let the moment pass, they will spend that same half-century living under rules written by others. Carney said it. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. 40 economies, the world's largest free trade bloc. The most consequential diplomatic ambition in Canadian history. And tonight, right now, Canada is not on the menu. Canada is setting the table. I'm Liam Smith. This is Liam Analysis Tonight. Thank you for being here. Stay strong, Canada.